There's an old tradition in Jewish life, an old custom to not count Jews. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. To not count Jews, to not count Jews. So the origins of the tradition are somewhat obscure. It may stem from a passage in Exodus, I think it's Exodus 30, where God asks Moses to count the Israelites, but not to do it directly, to instead count them by using a half a shekel, representing one half shekel for each Israelite, so it may stem from that. There also is something probably superstitious going on here, and even an idea, a little bit what Rabbi Sorokin was referring to earlier, actually, that when you attach a number to a person in a way that devalues them, because then they're a number and not a full human being. The problem, of course, with this tradition of not counting Jews is that we actually are a community fairly obsessed with counting itself, right? We do that all the time. First of all, just think of shul, because we need how many people for a minyan? 10 people. So how do you know if you have 10 people for a minyan without counting them? Shazi just said it. Say it again, Shazi. The motzi. Did you ever realize? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam ha'motzi lechem min ha'aretz is 10 words. So you will hear people, traditional Jews, when they need to count to see if there is a minyan, they'll use the motzi to do that, and this is why they're doing it. But on a larger scale, we are constantly counting ourselves. Currently in the world, how many Jews right now? Someone said 16, probably fewer, but about 15.5, so 15.5 million Jews is the current number these days. Something like 7 million of those Jews live in the land of Israel. Another 6.5 million or so live here in the States, and the rest scattered around the world. So 15.5 million, 7 in Israel, 6.5 million here in the States, and that last 500,000 just scattered around the world. It switched recently, by the way. It was about 4 or 5 years ago that the balance in terms of most number of Jews shifted from the States to Israel. Was at one point, again, 5, 6 years ago, there were more Jews in the States than in Israel, and that now has shifted. I think we come by the urge to count ourselves naturally, and it's also something, evidently, that we've been doing for a very long time, because, again, this morning's Torah portion right at the beginning, and if it's in the Torah, we're considering the material to be, let's say, 25, 26, maybe 2,800 years old, so it's old already, and it begins with a counting of the Israelites. And that's the reason the book of the Torah that we started reading this morning is called, in English, Numbers, right? It's about counting. So I guess the question is this: why are we so interested in counting ourselves? Why is that so important to us? Why this need to know how many Jews there are, whether it's in a minyan or a community or in Israel or the United States or all around the world? And I think the answer to that is pretty straightforward. There just are not many Jews in the world. There just are not many Jews in the world. If we have 15.5 million Jews, how many people are there in the world? About 8 billion. 8 billion. And if you do the math on that, and Eddie, I'm not going to do that kind of math, but if you do the math on that, you'll find that fewer than 1% of the world's population is Jewish. Fewer than 1%. And so we worry today, and we have worried historically as well, that there are not enough of us in the world, and that maybe even we are fading away, slowly but surely fading away. And these days, that sense of a tiny Jewish population might feel like just another component of the general unease and discomfort that we've been feeling as a Jewish community. Think of the unprecedented, at least in modern times, unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism here in the States, around the world, the struggles that Israel has been challenged with, most difficult time for Israel, I think, since 1973 and the Yom Kippur War. We've been subjected over the last months to continuous headlines about the protests on college campuses, the anti-Israel protests. You know, there's an old saying, it's hard to be a Jew. right? It's hard to be a Jew. Cantor can say it in Yiddish. Schwer zu sein a Yid. Yeah, it's hard to be a Jew, and we have been living that. I mean, we have been living it every single day for many months now. But you know what? Just for a second, look outside. Okay? It's a beautiful, beautiful spring day. Might be the nicest day of the year. It might be the nicest day of the year today. It's Shabbos. Shabbos is a day of rest. It's a day of peace. It's a day when the tradition asks us to feel grateful for the blessings in our lives, to unburden ourselves, to feel joy, all of those things. It's Shabbos. So this morning, I'm gonna try to bring you good news from the Jewish world. A little bit of good news from the Jewish world after all the tsuras that we've been living through and thinking about. Good news. And I'd like to start first, foremost, most importantly, what Rabbi Sorokin referred to earlier before we started reading the Torah. If you did not wake up early enough to read the newspaper or watch CNN or whatever news source you have before you came to shul, there were 4 hostages that had been held captive in Gaza. They were rescued early this morning in Israel time, about 10:30 Israel time, by the IDF. So we continue to pray for the safety and release and return of the remaining hostages, but we can be grateful today that 4 Israeli families will be welcoming home their loved ones after an unimaginable and horrific 246-day ordeal. 246-day. Those young people, all 4 of them were captured, taken by Hamas at the Nava Music Festival. So all 4, and they're returning to their families. And even beyond that, there are glimmers of hope, the ongoing negotiations in the region that, of course, we hope and we pray will enable both Israelis and Palestinians to be able to live in safety and in peace. But let's today be grateful for the return of the 4 hostages, for their families, and for the courage of the IDF soldiers who led them to freedom, a complicated and dangerous mission this morning. Along the lines of international news, I'm guessing you all know that Mexico has a new president of Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo is her name, Mexico's first woman president, which in and of itself is a significant thing, but also its first Jewish president. The president of Mexico is Jewish. Mexico's a Catholic country. About 88% of the citizens of Mexico are Catholic, identify as Catholic. And to go back to numbers for a second, Mexico has about 50,000 Jewish residents, 50,000 Jewish citizens in Mexico, out of a country of 131 million. Okay, so there's not a lot of Jews living in Mexico. Most of the Jewish community in Mexico mostly is in Mexico City. So it's a striking thing that a Jew is going to be president of Mexico. And Mexico's a real country, you know, it's a serious thing. She is not a religiously observant person, Claudia Sheinbaum, not religiously observant, but she does, and publicly, identify culturally as Jewish. She talks about it. She's the daughter of Eastern European immigrants and has publicly spoken out about how Jewish values have informed her sense of identity and approach to politics. So in a world that recently has felt like it was closing its doors to people who were Jewish and shutting Jews out and hostile to Jews who publicly proclaim their Jewish identity, it just feels good. It just feels good. It's a welcome sign to see one of the world's major countries elect a Jew to be its president. Good news, good news. Okay. One last piece of good news this morning. So we went from Israel to Mexico, and let's bring it back here to Bethel, right back here to Bethel. Just a couple of weeks ago, Cantor King and Ben Kreshtul and I sat down with a young woman and her husband, remember this, down in the Soul Center. The 3 of us formed a Beit Din, so that's a Jewish court, and the young woman came before us because she was at the end of her conversion process, her process of becoming Jewish, and she was explaining during the Beit Din why it was so important for her to be a Jew, why she wanted to go to the mikveh that morning and become part of the Jewish people. And she talked about her admiration for the Jewish people, She talked about the strength of Jewish family. It was very important to her. She talked about Jewish values that she had identified, that she felt were important values in her own life. She talked about intellectual freedom. She talked about honesty. She talked about resilience. She talked about determination, things that she had experienced in making her life, pitching her tent in the Jewish community. And she told us she was proud to have the opportunity to become part of the Jewish community and proud to have the chance to live her life as a Jew. She doesn't have to do it. She's choosing during this time to become part of the Jewish people and to cast her fate with the fate of Am Yisrael. One significant caveat to her story, she also is pregnant. She also is pregnant. So when she went to the mikveh and she became Jewish, the baby also became Jewish. So two new Jews in the world. 2 for 1, but who's counting? We are. So we're waiting in the outer room. The mikveh attendant was Marissa from the Soul Center, right? I think. And we were waiting in the outer room, and this young woman comes out after submersing in the mikveh. So she's soaking wet, her hair's wet, but tears just coming down her eyes. Yep. And that's how proud she was. That's how grateful she felt to become part, again, of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people. And if you don't feel hopeful about the Jewish future, when you see something like that, I don't know what'll do it for you, Now, there's even a sense of hope and optimism in this morning's Haftarah text, so beautifully chanted by Ben. And I've said a million times, like if you had $1 for every time you'd be retired, There's always a link between the Haftarah and the Torah text. Rabbi Sorokin hinted at the link this morning. There's counting happening in both texts. But the prophet Hosea is the Haftarah prophet. The prophet counts in a different kind of way. The Torah actually counts. It's counting one after another. The prophet picks up on that idea of counting people, but not in terms of actual numbers today, but in terms of what numbers might be one day, what they might be one day. And Hosea says this, V'haya mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam. The number of the Israelites, the number of the Jewish people will be like the sands of the sea, cannot be measured, cannot be counted. So let's let some hope into our hearts today. Again, beautiful spring day. The skies are blue. The sun is warm. There's a beautiful, gentle breeze blowing through the trees. I can see it right from here. Feel it in a few minutes. And let's hope that the Jewish people will continue to be strong, will one day be many, and that the Jewish future will always and every day be bright. And hope also today and every day that one day, Bayom Hahu, always says in the prophets, there will be a world of shalom, of peace. Shabbat shalom.